Hi viewers, welcome to another at Newsworthy Publications video. My name is Ben Gray, a citizen journalist who's lived in Bristol for the last 20 years and is dedicated to exposing egregious corruption within the Avon and Somerset Police Force and the judiciary, both in the High Court and in Bristol. This is a quick video to, I say, expose the egregious corruption and the blood on the hands and general villainy of this chap, Mr. Jeremy Vine. Jeremy Vine is a very well-known celebrity as well as a journalist, and he has his own channel on Channel 5, and he also does some afternoon radio work for the BBC and doubtless other um, type stuff along the way. Mr. Vine is, I allege, an egregious, corrupt, and lying journalist who is colluding in child abuse and the cover up of such heinous acts, as well as kidnapping, false imprisonment, sexual assault, attempted murder, misconduct in public office, perverting justice, and industrial scale perjury. Now, why do I make these allegations against Mr. Vine in particular? Well, of course, he's a particularly famous and well-known journalist. So if I make these allegations online, it should, to some extent, garner some interest, more interest than potentially I'm getting at the moment from my various videos disclosing such heinous evil within the heart of the criminal justice system at large. And also because it sickens me to my stomach to see this man parading himself as some kind of doyen of righteous and proper journalism, when in fact, really what he does for the most part, I suspect, is cover up, collude in, and generally lie on behalf of whatever establishment he happens to favour. And he does already regularly make very favourable comments on behalf of the police and various corrupt elements within the legal establishment as well as government at large. He often talks about, in a very casual manner, the how it used to be acceptable for a police officer to give somebody a clip round the ear. That's a quotation from himself that is used many times. If you want to trace back over his various output. And of course, what he's condoning there is major criminal violence being carried out by officers of the law who are supposed to be protecting members of the public, even suspects, and not smacking people or hitting them or whatever clip around the ear entails. But it obviously entails some sort of violence, and it's usually directed in Mr. Vine's submission to young people so that they're then dissuaded, as they would have been in the old days, not to mess with the law or accept far worse or expect far worse in terms of getting a clip around the ear form of violence. Now, my campaign generally is that I'm being victim of the most heinous police brutality, torture, kidnapping, with the condoning of High Court judges such as Lord Justice William Davis, Lord Justice Mark Warby, Lord Justice Stephen Irwin, many others that I could name, but don't need to. If you go to my other videos, any one of them on my YouTube channel will give you far more details and, more importantly, provide the evidence to substantiate these very serious allegations. So I pick on Mr. Vine in particular because he makes these horrible comments about it being acceptable for police officers to beat or hit suspected arrested people when they're clearly forbidden from doing that by criminal law, even for those who have been found guilty of criminal wrongdoing. And of course, if people are suspects, then they deserve it least of all in terms of any form of on the spot corporal punishment that Mr. Vine cheekily and obviously with a bit of a tongue in his cheek suggests. But obviously beneath that, the jest is many a true word, I would suggest. So what I'm going to do is read out my latest email to Mr. Vine, and then finish off with a few home truths about what I say Mr. Vine is effectively guilty of. So this is an email I sent to him very recently, dated the 26th of March. It's now 2nd of April, so it hasn't been that long since I sent this email, but of course I've sent him many more in his capacity as a journalist for the BBC, and been treated similarly. But this is the simple email that I sent to him. Uh, FAO, Mr. Jeremy Vine, re evidence of judicial collusion in child abuse, kidnapping, attempted murder, torture, etc. And then I go on to, as I say, this is to his address at Channel 5, jeremyvine at channel5.com. And I state, hello, Mr. Vine. I'm seeking journalistic interest in terms of evidence I have supporting the above allegations and more, which I'm disclosing via documentaries on my YouTube channel at Newsworthy Publications. For instance, below is a link to one of my latest documentaries, Judge Michael Longman, Evil Incarnate. And there's obviously the link with a photograph of Mr. Justice Stephen Silber, who was connected to my complaint against Judge Longman, in cahoots, I suggest, in terms of conniving himself in torture and child abuse and so forth. So I look forward to any interest you have in exposing this evil abuse of power and the criminal justice system. Yours faithfully, Ben Gray. So there it is. It's totally understood that Mr. Vine is a very busy and important man. There's no dispute about that. I would be the last to argue. And indeed, I wouldn't be seeking his help if it was the case that he wasn't somebody that had a high profile and therefore was extremely busy. But of course, he has people working for him, his helpers, who would go through all the emails, presumably, that are sent, looking for stories to publish and to take an interest in. But of course, as I said, I've contacted him repeatedly over the years. So this was a last ditch attempt to get his interest or get some interest from him, and he's provided none. Now, I would suggest that he's answerable to that, to the allegation, to the assertion that he is colluding in the very allegations I'm complaining of. Therefore, child abuse, perverting justice, kidnapping, sexual assault, you name it, virtually everything short of actual murder. And of course, the complaint is that the journalists, be they Dominic Casciani, who is the lead court reporter for the BBC, um, many people, other people that I could name who I've sought interest in terms of pursuing these matters. All of them stonewall me. I've physically stood outside the BBC headquarters in London and with a big poster saying I have evidence of judicial collusion in these kind of offences. And they just walk on by as though I'm just some nutter, wailing into the wind for no good purpose. This is the arrogant attitude they take. And this is, of course, why I suggest that we have these major scandals that come to light every so often. The post office scandal, which obviously only came to light because of the interest from the ITV program, the grooming gang scandal, the expenses of the House of Commons expenses scandal of a few years back. I could obviously go on, list scandal after scandal, which have only taken place because effectively the press not only don't do their job, they are hand in glove with the very corruption that is being complained of. Indeed, they are effectively perpetrating it in some senses more than any corrupt judge or corrupt politician or corrupt um, police officer, because they are the ones who are the final eyes, if you like, on and give oversight to what goes on in the criminal courts and in the police stations and basically in public life at large. And they are as bad as the people that they claim that they're supposed to be keeping an eye on and holding to account. And of course, Jeremy Vine is a classic example of somebody that has no other purpose, as I see it, than to distract the public's attention from the real heinous and extent of corruption within politics and within, in particular, in my case, within the criminal courts and within the police stations across the country. The banality of most of his output, and unfortunately, I'm a singleton living on my own in Bristol, so I do watch his Channel 5 program from time to time. If only just because it is actually interesting in the extent to which it is completely banal and often gratuitous rubbish that he produces, and his guests, mostly of the of a particular persuasion, not entirely, but he himself obviously feels that it is almost a duty to waffle on about utterly rubbish, meaningless, nonsensical stories. I can't think of any offhand. They're so banal that it's impossible to even stay in the mind. But the real scandals get left behind and completely covered up. And I would suggest that is part of his role, is part of his actual raison d'etre is not as an investigative journalist, not someone out to expose any serious corruption, especially within the police and the criminal courts, but rather to actually distract the public's attention to convince everybody that in fact everything is right in the best of this all possible worlds. There is no scandal or grotesque, heinous atrocities that are being carried out in the public's name and in the public interest that the press are effectively colluding in. And any suggestion would be from a lunatic or a conspiracy theorist or somebody who's completely out to lunch. Except, of course, when we have these major scandals about the rape gangs, which, of course, I think get very few mention from Mr. Vine in his reports, in his journalistic output. Or the post office scandal, or any other rampant abuse of power. Not, and I'm picking on examples that are high profile, that should have been high profile because they affected so many people and so much of the criminal justice system that the only reason that they reached the horrors, the proportions, the horrific proportions that they reached was because clearly, or one main reason was because the journalists see themselves as in the pockets of and working for the courts, when of course in reality it's supposed to be the other way around. Not that the courts work for journalists, but it's the journalists who are supposed to be holding the judicial system to account by monitoring it and properly reporting on, in particular, high profile cases, or cases that should be high profile if they have the press attention in the first place. And of course, the post office scandal is a prime example because that was an issue that obviously on its own as one single case was not of any great. It was a ultimate banality that should have been, ironically, the interest of someone like Jeremy Vine, who takes a great deal of fascination in banality on any sort of scale. But of course, on the scale that we understand it, with the dozens of cases that where people were unjustly prosecuted, um, it's only when they reach that critical mass that the public are forced to take an interest, when the press themselves actually get off their backsides and actually do their job. And While all those cases had passed by without notice, just as obviously on a much larger scale, the rape gang scandal unfolded years after the actual incidents had took place, or some of the court cases had took place. But the industrial scale of it, of course, must have been in part the responsibility of journalists like Jeremy Vine. But here's the crux of my current video and why I make the allegations against Mr. Vine. Now, Mr. Vine has been referred to my video link, and it was just one video, but of course there are many more on my channel with clear, glaring evidence of the most heinous, wicked villainy. In this case, concerning Judge Michael Longman, thankfully now retired from Bristol Crown Court, and his overseer, Mr. Justice Stephen Silver, who is himself also thankfully retired. But he still works part time, as I understand it, for Verulam Buildings, two Verulam Buildings. I'm not entirely sure, but I'll put the correct email address, the correct location online. And all he would have to do, or one of his colleagues in the first instance, is click on that channel, that click to that link, and he would be immediately confronted with irrefutable evidence that such heinous atrocity has taken place. And my argument is that turning a blind eye, refusing to publish, refusing to take an interest on such allegations as child abuse, on such allegations as torture or attempted murder or industrial scale corruption within the criminal courts is to participate in that corruption. There is no tangible difference, especially if it's quite clear that the courts, the judges, the parties involved, the CPS, the police officers, all are relying on the press being utterly at the service and kowtowing to and kneeling and bowing before the courts when they should by of any form of logic, any independent, proper journalist in a proper democratic country like the UK should be absolutely fearless in taking an interest in such allegations. And obviously, as one final point, I should point out that whenever I phone, having been stonewalled, I mean, this is one of at least 20 such emails I've sent over the past year, or even 6 months alone. None of them get a response. None of them, except the automated response, none of them have any interest uh, and to make it clear they are actively, proactively not interested in such evidence. And this actually escalates, or it becomes if you actually contact them verbally and go on the phone and speak to press the what are they called the receptionists, the phone operators, many of whom are themselves journalists, they will actually become aggressive and rude. They will tell you there's lots of stock kind of responses. One of them, or we get this kind of complaint almost every day. So there's two questions there. Is every single person that's contacting them giving them a full story? Because if the philosophy is, well, we get so many complaints from members of the public saying that they are victims or know people who are victims of major violence within the judicial system or major corruption within the CPS and the police and various judges to the extent of collusion and torture and child abuse and all the heinous evil criminality I've just cited, then either that it is happening on an industrial scale, but it's certainly not going to not happen if the attitude of everybody you contacted through the press takes the attitude, well, it must be rubbish because we get so many complaints of this nature. Clearly, it's not clear if any or who contacted the press during the rape gang scandal and the 30,000 young, mainly young women who were prey to the evil that was going on during that period. But presumably, anybody that did, any young girl was, as a last resort, saying, well, the police are colluding in it, the social services are colluding in it. The rape gangs are having a laugh because they just say that, oh, anybody that complains about it is a racist, and therefore they use that as the go-to card to carry out the industrial scale raping. Then clearly that is why it would carry on because everybody involved, every single heinous uh, participant or actor in that whole scandal involving tens of thousands of young people in the country, underage people in the country, could rely on the fact that if ever any of them goes to the press as a last resort, when we know we've got the police and social services in our pockets, well, they can go to the press, but the press will just say, oh, we get loads of these complaints, so we're not going to investigate any of them. And of course, if it was them, if they were the complainants, if they were the ones who were being kidnapped, if they were the ones who were being sexually assaulted or subject to criminal or corrupt proceedings, then of course it would be front page news. It would be Dominic Casciani is falsely kidnapped or falsely imprisoned and sexually assaulted by PC Jangs or whoever was the person responsible. So it's this hierarchy, isn't it? As usual, there's the two tier. Obviously, the fact that I'm a white male counts against me worst of all. Then there's the allegations of racism. That, of course, makes me untouchable because anybody that is branded racist, rightly or wrongly, immediately becomes has to be the enemy or public enemy number one. And then there are all the gradations of people that are permitted to be victims. All would be investigated, including how wealthy you are, your status, and your so forth. So, and of course, Jeremy Vine is a key example of all those different malign aspects to journalism in this country, wrapped into one single rather obnoxious and egocentric individual. And you know, as I say, I take an interest in watching his programs, and sometimes he can be quite flippant and funny and amusing. But for the most part, the way he dresses up every his view as being the views of the rest of the countries, of the rest of the country's view. But of course, within that is the hypocrisy and lies that have to be spun continually because we live in a brutally and glaringly corrupt country. And any pretense, we see it on a daily basis. And I'm not going to blather on about, you know, the current news stories that we hear about. But at the end of the day, um, what kind of a monster, what kind of a filthy, lying, corrupt individual journalist, whether it is Jeremy Vine himself or all the people that work for him and filter those stories or potential stories that are sent him to see what he's interested in, and all the other journalists I've contacted who have all made it quite clear which side their bread is buttered, and it isn't on the side of right, it isn't on the side of truth, it isn't on the side of goodness, it isn't on the side of justice, it is on the side of that money and power and status, and of course, overcapping it all is celebrity status because it is celebrities who draw the attention of the media on any particular issue, whether it's a celebrity that's crusading against kicking racism out of football, all very laudable, I'm sure, but all the other causes that can only be got attention by way of having um, the celebrity status to begin with. Now, Jeremy Vine is a celebrity. He crosses the avenue, sorry, crosses the bridge between being a journalist and presumably having some kind of kudos and reputation as being a decent journalist, or hopefully he wouldn't have reached the status he has now, into being a what is it, a strictly come dancing celebrity, you know, bon vivant, raconteur, humorist, whatever else he portrays himself as. And I have no qualms or truck with anything Mr. Vine wants to sell himself as and present himself to the public. His life is his own. But what we cannot have is any form of of delusionment or indoctrination or lies or what's the current expression, you know, of fake news portraying Mr. Jeremy Vine in the context of what I've just read out in terms of my communication with him and my many other communications with him, or attempt to communicate with him, that he is just another lying journalist, another child abusing, corrupt, perverter of justice, kidnapper, and every single offense that I accuse the various judges, politicians, and civilians, as well as obviously police officers and CPS officers, if I haven't already said them. And of course, the final point to round off on is it important, and I try and stress it in all my videos, is that there is a criminal offence in this country called misfeasance or misconduct in judicial or public office. And it doesn't just apply to police officers, it doesn't just apply to lawyers, it doesn't just apply to civil servants and so forth. It includes judges themselves. These are the rulings of the High Court, or certainly the criminal courts, under R.V. Bembridge, and I put up the full titles or the full citation for these authorities, and R.V. Llewellyn-Jones, and I think there's one more, but certainly those two. If you go onto the judicial website, you will see that there's just a cock and bull about judges having immunity from prosecution. This is utter, complete rubbish. The common law of having being guilty of an offence of a judge whilst in office, and therefore the misfeasance is obviously their judicial. It has involved them acting as judges. They can be, and certainly, of course, should be prosecuted and found guilty for offences under that remit. But what is the point of having that authority? First of all, you have the official government website lying to say that, in fact, there is no such authority and judges have immunity from suit. If they had immunity, they do have immunity from suit. They can't be sued, but they can be prosecuted. And of course, if they had immunity from prosecution, then they could do anything in whilst sitting as judges, including shooting somebody or biting off the ear of their clerk. I mean, it's obviously utter nonsense. And of course, the fact that the official government website wants to peddle this nonsense as true just says how corrupt this country actually is. And of course, the point here is that what is the point though of that authority, even though we know that the judicial website is itself a lie? Well, why is it a lie? Is because the press are so corrupt, they're so useless, and so utterly beholden to judges who aren't even elected themselves, who have no one to account to except the press, even in terms of their uh, general conduct or the decisions over sentencing or whatever, or particularly, or the current issue over immigration decisions. But what is the point, essentially, if the press do not properly investigate or hold them to account or report them for any evidence of corruption they may have committed? The authority just as might just as well not exist, because no judge is going to hand himself in and say, "Oh, I'm actually sorry. All these years I've been guilty of misconduct in public office. Please convict and sentence me to up to life imprisonment," which is what misconduct in public office has as the maximum sentence. So the the only point of that authority is, well, obviously the first port of call and my mission in life, if not part of these channels, is to refer to the general public the fact that in fact judges are and should be held accountable for any glaring evidence of corruption in which they participate, and of course that would be lying, serially lying in judgment to convict innocent parties or to exonerate and get off the hook seriously guilty parties. And of course that involves a small amount of subjectivity, but is largely an objective view on the facts. But of course, no judge is going to hand themselves in, and therefore the only recourse, the only other judge that exists in the world, or certainly in this country, are the court of public opinion, based on information they receive from the general public. And of course, what we're talking about here is a massive, complete and utter stonewalling from all members of the journalistic fraternity or sorority in some cases. Um, but and we can see it cannot just be me and just complaining about my one story, because I'm clearly not the only person to suffer the sort of injustice and the glaring evidence of police torture. I'm not talking about just vague allegations. Of course, every single one of my allegations, if you're interested in my footage, in my videos, will show is based on hard footage, document, court case reference numbers, judgments, witness statements, medical records, and the like. And as I say, you wouldn't have to be a legal eagle or some kind of major legal professor to assess whether or not there's a prima facie case to, or professor of journalism, I should say, also, to assess whether there's a basic case to answer. And as I say, where are all these other stories that arise that are going on right under the noses of the press? Why have they been allowed to happen if what I'm saying is not completely true? But as I say, let's narrow it down to individuals. Let's not allow ourselves or the system to just disappear into a wall of cronies and back scratching, self-interested idiots like someone like Mr. Vine is a prime example of. Let's narrow it down to Mr. Vine himself. Mr. Vine, you are a child abusing, perverter of justice, kidnapping, lying scoundrel. And for colluding in such monstrosity, you yourself should be investigated. You yourself should be held to account in the same way you claim to hold others in high office to account.